Then I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here I'm sharing Igami. Can people see it? Okay, so this is one of the papers that I'd like you to guys to read. It should be fairly understandable or comprehensible because it's quite straightforward naman. So let's run through it. Okay, so let's read the abstract. This paper studies the impact of market power on international commodity prices. I use a standard oligopoly model, specifically the one we just studied right now. Okay. Oh, by the way, kita nyo ba? I should really pause and ask if everyone can see it. Thumbs up. There's one person. Okay, good enough. 2 people, 9 people. Okay. So may standard oligopoly model tayo, which is the Cournot model. Okay. And i-review natin. Si Cournot model is ano yung strategic instrument or decision choice ng firms in the oligopoly model, guys. Dalawa lang yan, di ba? Price or quantity? Which is it? Price or quantity?
Quantity po, sir.
Yes, quantity. So in this case, you have a Cournot competition in coffee. They set quantities and that will generate a market price. In this case, an international commodity market price for coffee. So that's the idea. The results suggest that there is this international coffee agreement and it raised the price of coffee by 75% above the Cournot competitive level. So ang ibig sabihin nito is they calculated a Cournot level of the price. Diba? You're able to do that because you're able to calculate the Cournot model and then calculate the markup that's based on the Cournot model. Okay? And ano yung per firm learner index ng Cournot? It's price minus marginal cost over price equals what? Something divided by market demand, right? Elasticity of market demand. What's that something? It's the share, okay? And if you remember, if you sum that to get an industry level markup, you will get something divided by the market demand, elasticity of market demand. What's that something again? If you come up with an industry average. Okay, HHI, diba? So we've covered this already, that you can have an average markup for an industry. And what they're saying is that it's even higher than that. It's almost 2 times, because 100% is like twice. It's almost 2 times the level of the Cournot competitive level. So it's even less competitive than a standard Cournot model would suggest. Okay. What else? Annually transferring 12 billion from consumers to exporting countries, and its lapse in 1989 explains 4/5 of the subsequent prices decline. That is the coffee crisis. Apparently, there was a coffee crisis in 89 and prices fell. Now, with regard to Cournot, especially as what we were discussing right now, here's a price, real price of coffee. I'll jump to the part where he talks about the model that he's going to use to understand the coffee market. Okay, so first let's talk about seed demand. Okay, here's the world demand. Determines the relationship between world exports, this is total world production, and the price. Okay, so this is essentially what we've been dealing with. Like, this is just, instead of inverse demand, which is pricing nasa kaliwa, this is simple demand, quantity as a function of price. Meron kang mga shifters like Z, and meron ka ring X, which is something. It's empirical X, the level of world income. So income affects demand for coffee as well as substitutes. Okay, so in a sense, this is a little bit more general because we're sort of ignoring X and Z whenever we do our work, right? Because in a sense, it's exogenous to the competition. But this is ways to adjust or have exogenous variation in the level of demand. That's what the reason why we're considering all of these two things. Meaning it's exogenous to the game that people are playing. The people are just deciding how much to produce and they're taking X and Z as given. Okay. So here's the setup. Every month, the world demands coffee beans. This is the inverse demand. So you just invert the one above. And it's the same inverse demand as we've known. Price is a function of quantity. So ano itong QT, si aggregate supply? Okay. Si QT is ito, and it's the sum of two things. The ones produced by the cartel, which is QC, and the one produced by Vietnam, which is the entrant. So kita mo pa lang, ano nang itsura nito? It's like exactly like the Cournot models we've been seeing. Because sa Cournot models, how many players do you usually deal with? In the simple example, 2. And in this case, because we have the cartel and everyone else, ilan lang rin? Dalawa lang rin. Okay? But the number of participants doesn't really matter. I'm just pointing out to you guys how simple, how applicable, how simple it is to apply Cournot to a commodity, right? It's typically how we would apply or understand commodity market competition. Okay, so this is also interesting. Given PQ, which is the QT is the total, no, everyone, and QV, which is yung everyone else, right? Magkakaroon ka ng demand curve net of fringe supply, which the 54 cartel members decide their collective exports QC. In the language that we used before, ano tawag doon? Yung what is the demand that a Cournot competitor faces after you subtract everyone else's production? What do you call that? Or what did we call that? Residual demand. Exactly, Leland. Thank you. So residual demand nga ito. So again, I'm just trying to point out, this is exactly linked one-to-one to what we studied before. Magkakaroon sila, by sila I mean the cartel, ng residual demand. And that's where they will maximize their profits collectively. Also, that's related to our homework. Remember our homework? Not homework, in exam. Because one of the questions in exam is, what if all the dairy producers began to have a cartel and pretend they're a monopoly? And it's a simple monopoly problem. Right? Most people got that. But some people still did not get the correct calculation. So that's why we're going to do the Cournot calculation today. The setup also has a Cournot component in the sense that the second mover is not a single decision maker, but a collection of export quantity setting competitors whose coordination may not be perfect in practice. Okay. There's another thing. So later on, we'll be talking about the Stackelberg game. Okay. So a Stackelberg game is a Cournot, pero may mauuna. May mauuna. The point that he's trying to make here is it's only a Stackelberg game if the two competitors in that Stackelberg game are behaving strategically, meaning they're aware of the response of the other person or the other player. What he is saying here is that the growth of Vietnam is more of a shock. No one expected it. And therefore, it's not an active strategic player at the point in time in which they're studying. So parang exogenous shock lang siya. So it's not a Stackelberg game, and they will continue to analyze it as a static or sabay-sabay tayong lahat game. Sort of. Yeah, wherein the Cournot competitors or the cartel will maximize relative to the residual demand. Okay, game. So here you have estimates of the world coffee bean demand. Okay. So what are these numbers here? Just to make sure everyone gets it. What are these numbers here? In the first row. This is table 2, first row. This is the coefficient of quantity of coffee exports. They are estimating the inverse demand. The dependent variable is price as a function of quantity. Yeah, it's how the price is affected by the quantity. It's the slope of the inverse demand for coffee. It's the slope of the inverse demand for coffee. It's the same as when we draw a graph. Right? With price as the y-axis and quantity as the x-axis, ito yung slope. And the slope is negative. And there are other things here like, income increases your demand as well. And then these are substitutes. Okay, these are substitutes. So pag tumaas yung price ng tea, according to this, what would happen? Pag tumaas ang price ng tea, what would happen? I think Z is in US dollars per pound or something. Yeah. The coffee price increases. Is that correct behavior for complements? Or I should say substitutes, I should say. Yeah, it is. Pag tumaas yung competitor mo, mas dadami mas tataas yung presyo ng actual good na tinitignan mo. You'll see that more clearly in yung Bertrand competition later on. Okay, let's move on here to the actual model. Oh, let's go to para mas klaro. I just wanted to point out really the fact na gumamit. It's basically, this is just Cournot, but using actual numbers. Meron tayo. Oops, sorry. Sumobra. Okay. So this is essentially yung model na ginagamit nila. This one. Now, according to this paper, they have everything in here. They have the quantities. They have each country's exports as well the total exports. They have the price for coffee. They have the cost of making coffee here. And what's this? What's this? What's this one? Nasaan na yung ko? Yeah. Sandali, lilipat lang ako ng kwarto. Okay, sorry, I'm back. Okay, that's the slope, right? It's just the first derivative. And that's exactly what we are, or what he is, estimating in the earlier table. So ito lang yung wala na data. And this is what an econometrician would estimate. So lahat ng ingredients ng equation na to, kuhang-kuha mo na. Right? Now, if you look at this, so this comes from the first order condition again. Pag dinivide mo siya by the total output, QC, magiging 1/n yung right side. That means ito is QIT divided by QC. Can someone explain bakit siya 1/n in this case? That means QIT divided by QC, yung total output ni cartel, is 1/n. Bakit?
Sir, I'd like to try po.
Go ahead.
Is because QC po is equal to N times QIT?
Oo. Kasi pare-pareho lang sila, di ba? So therefore, they'll all produce the same amount. And if you divide it by the total, parang kinuha mo lang yung N. Because like you said, the total is just N times each person's output. Okay. So meron siyang 1/n dito. Okay. And so in this one, this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. What did they actually do? And I wanted to get to the point where they actually showed the result. If I can find it. Okay, so the goal of the section is to estimate the structural model, demand estimates, kasi kailangan yun lang ang wala sila. Meron silang observed and estimated na markup. Okay, estimated kasi may estimate na galing sa residual demand or galing sa model. So the model will give you a markup. Meron ka ring observed kasi meron ka ring marginal cost dito sa data. Okay. Okay, combined with the estimated demand function, the first order conditions equation 2 allows us to estimate the country-specific marginal cost of exports. Okay. So this will allow you to get MC. Okay. Nandito na tayo. Based on the estimated world demand and the country-specific costs, as well as the assumption of Cournot competition in the export market, we can calculate the pre-July 1989 counterfactual prices and quantities that would have prevailed had the cartel agreement never materialized. I.e., if the United States had not participated in the ICA. Table 3 compares the actual, column A, and counterfactual, column B, prices, exports, and consumer surplus, and blah, 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 and displays their differences. This simulation will provide us with the benchmark economic intuitions or outcomes against which to measure the welfare impact of the cartel treaty. Without the ICA, the coffee price would have been lower by this much. Okay, and the world exports slightly higher by 6 million bags at 70 million bags. Okay, these welfare estimates rely on my modeling assumptions and estimates of the primitives in section 4 and 5, including estimated demand, estimated country-specific shocks, and Cournot competition in 1989 to 2006. Moreover, similar estimates arise from an alternative empirical approach using the direct measure of costs and markups, as well as the assumption of symmetry across countries in Appendix D. So meron silang direct measure of costs and markups, and the numbers are similar as to when they used yung estimated country marginal costs. These three results seem to indicate the robustness of the paper's main finding that the ICA raised coffee prices by 75% above the Cournot competitive level, annually transferring approximately 12 billion from consumers to exporting countries. Okay. So pag-aralan muna natin itong table 3. Okay. Itong si A, column A, ito yung actual data. So merong actual data on price and quantity. The consumer and producer surplus are generated from estimates, unfortunately. So these are sort of like estimates under the actual. Kasi consumer surplus comes from the demand function, which we estimated, and producer surplus will come up with prices against marginal costs, which is average costs. Social welfare is the following. Okay. Si counterfactual, dito pumapasok yung situation na paano kung Cournot lang sila, right? As opposed to the actual price, okay? What if nasunod yung model natin ng Cournot competition? And the price according to the Cournot competition is the one that's actually happening in the world, as opposed to the actual price. So this one represents Cournot competition. Based on, sabi nga nila, the estimated demand and the assumption of Cournot competition and the estimated marginal cost. Okay, so mag-ingat kayo. The counterfactual here is not perfect competition. Okay, what's the counterfactual? The counterfactual here is price and output under the Cournot model. Okay. Any questions about Igami? I'll go through this again and see if there's anything more interesting. But the point that I wanted to do right now is to basically draw attention to yung similarities nito and yung ginagawa natin ngayon, which is the Cournot competition. What's interesting here? The appendix. Usually if you go to the appendix, that's where the cool stuff is. Reduced form. They do a bunch of robustness checks. Okay. This is one of the cool pictures that they've got. This is when the cartel is broken. And then their analysis here says that this is essentially Cournot competition relative to a cartel situation here. This is figure 8. Okay. So I will now change the slide share. Any questions for now? And right now, ang gagawin lang natin is we're going to return to Cournot.